So I wanted to start tonight our shiur in Nefesh HaHaim. I gave it a title, Kabala and Rationalism in the Postmodern Age. Sort of provocative and, modern and everything. So here's how I want to explain it. I want to start with, it's a beautiful mashal that I heard. I heard it when I was at Columbia University from a smart guy. And it's a story about a rich balabas in Poland. Let's put it in the 1850s or something like that. And he's a rich guy and he has two daughters. So he wants, very chashuv shidduchim for his daughters. And he goes to the Rav, and the Rav says, oh yes, I've heard about a very chashuv bacher. The bacher learns in a certain Hasidic yeshiva. So he goes to the Hasidic yeshiva, and maybe even he has to speak to the Rebbe, and he says, they make sort of a deal that this bacher, this Hasidic bacher, he's interested in the shidduch. He's a rich guy, being the son-in-law of a gvir, it's, hitting the jackpot. But he has a hanhaga of kedusha that he only eats fleishigs, three meals a day. So the gvir says, okay, you eat fleishigs 3 meals a day. I can accommodate that. I'll give you, salami and eggs for breakfast, and I'll give you a hamburger for lunch and steak for dinner, and, gewaldig, fine. V'kach Have and his daughter marries this Hasidic bacher, and they are eating fleishigs. They live by the shver, of course, and they eat fleishigs 3 times a day. It's 2 years past, and it's time for his second daughter to get married. And of course, he's looking for the most chashuv bacher he can find for his second daughter. And he goes around town, he speaks to Talmidei Chachamim, and somebody says, oh, yeah, I know somebody, he's zugepasst, it sounds like a good shidduch for your daughter. He's at a Litvish yeshiva, they're mamish misnagdim. And he says, okay, well, I'm looking for, Torah and Yirat Shamayim, it doesn't matter to me. So let me go speak to the Rosh Yeshiva. So he goes there, and sure enough, it sounds like a good deal. And he meets the bacher, and the bacher says, okay, but I have this hanhaga. I only eat milchigs, three meals a day. So he says, okay, so for breakfast, kasha, and for lunch, we'll have cheese sandwiches, and for dinner, we'll have, souffle and fancy stuff, maybe some salmon with cheese on it, or I don't know what. So that's good. Good morning, Lauren Brown. Nice to. Oh, it's Jay.
That's me. I'm in Lauren Brown's house. That right now. Yerushalayim.
Oh, you're in Yerushalayim?
Yep.
Welcome. Lauren Brown seems like someone I know. He looks familiar to me, but whatever.
Yeah, he's from Nefesh Aviv originally.
That explains it. And I've seen him around. Yeah. Okay, that was a trick. That was a surprise. Nice to see you, Jay.
I was trying to recruit people,
Okay, well, it's, it happens over time.
Yeah.
So welcome. So did you hear my story so far?
No.
Okay, I'll make it short.
Right.
I gave a title to our learning, Kabbalah and Rationalism in the Postmodern Age. And so I want to start by juxtaposing Kabbalah and Rationalism, which are, seemingly maybe at odds. We've talked a lot about the Ramban as a Kabbalist and the Rambam as a rationalist and their differences of opinion. But of course, it's much more complicated than that. The Ramban himself is, of course, very rational, and he was a doctor, so he was a scientist. And of course, the Rambam as a rationalist, but he's, immensely spiritual, and he's all about understanding Nevuah and the prophetic process. So anyway, I'm telling a story, a mashal, about a rich guy. Here comes another person. Michael is connecting to audio. David, do you know who this is?
I believe it's my friend from the army.
Okay, great. So it's a story about a rich guy, and he's looking for shidduchim for his two daughters. And he makes the shidduch with the first daughter with the Chassidish Bacher. And the Chassidish Bacher says he only eats fleischigs 3 times a day. And the Sha'ar says, okay, I can accommodate that, And he makes a shidduch then 2 years later for his second daughter with the chashiva guy. And he says, I only eat milchigs 3 times a day. And he says, okay. So that's how they're living now. Both young couples are living in the rich Shver's household. But they never eat together, because the first chassan is eating at the fleischig table, and the second chassan is eating at the milchig table. So they sort of keep their distance. Time goes by, and the rich Shver, his business doesn't flourish. He has some reversals. He's not doing as well. He has to downgrade. Instead of serving steak, he's now serving hot dogs. So it's still fleischigs, but it's, pretty pashit. And the milchig guy was eating souffle and sushi and fancy stuff and, ravioli. And now he's eating macaroni and cheese. It's pretty pashit stuff. But still, they maintain their distance because one's eating fleischigs and one's eating milchigs. But time continues, and the balabas fortunes continue to diminish until he has to essentially apologize to his first chassan and say, a deal's a deal, but I just can't afford it. We're going to be eating potatoes from now on. And so he serves him potatoes 3 times a day. And he says to his other son-in-law, his younger son-in-law, a deal's a deal, and you're supposed to get milchigs, but milk is expensive, so we're going to be eating potatoes 3 times a day. And what happened was, his sons-in-law stayed at 2 different tables, even though now everybody's eating parv, because, they had gotten used to it. I'm the fleischig son-in-law, and I'm the milchig son-in-law, even though now everybody's eating parv. So that's the mashal. The nimshal is that once upon a time there were great gedolim, and there was, the Balatanya and the Baal Shem Tov Bichlal and the Vilna Gaon and Reb Chaim Volozhin. There were real Hasidim and there were real Misnagdim. But, time's gone by, and the differences between, let's say, the great Sefer, the Balatanya, the Tanya itself, and the Sefer, the Nefesh HaHaIm, the differences from our perspective are essentially negligible. It's like, for us, it's all parv. And so the differences between them in some ways have melted away. And so to maintain, I'm a misnagid or I'm a chassid, in the postmodern era doesn't make any sense. The Hasidim have what to offer, and, the religious fervor and some really wonderful things from their chassidus. And we need to adopt those things. And the misnagdim have played a very important role in dikduk halacha and the depth of learning, the importance of learning, and we need to adopt that. But just like in 2 schools of thought of the Ramban and the Rambam, of the rationalists and the Kabbalists, we're at this stage in history, it would be foolish to think, well, we're from this school or from that school. We're not from any school. We're postmodern. We've seen it all and, been there, done that. We're even jaded a little bit from history. I've been reading a lot of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and he talks about the great ideas of the 19th century. Karl Marx and his insight into economics, and Darwin and his insight into evolution, and how those things ultimately were used for mass murder in the 20th century. So, Soviet Russia and Stalinism was based on Marxism, and Nazism and, the murder of the inferior race and the Untermenschen and all that stuff that came from social Darwinism. And they really thought they were serving science in some, disgusting way, warped way. So we can't be too doctrinaire. We have to look at different ideas and take the good from them and discard what doesn't make sense. and try to come up with something in our postmodern era that works for us and inspires us. And I think the Nefesh HaHaim is a wonderful place to be for that. The Nefesh HaHaim is about, I might call it Gadlus Adam, the greatness of man in the image of God, and how our soul reaches so high up until the high heavens that God breathed it into Adam Arishon. And he's going to talk about that, and how every little thing that you do and everything that you think and everything that you say all has impact on innumerable worlds that exist above us. And so one of the things that, postmodern man suffers from is sort of a lack of meaning and a feeling of I'm insignificant, and the universe has been around for billions of years and the earth for millions of years, and it's all random and so forth. And so, do I really matter? And does my life matter? And of course, the Jewish answer is yes, it matters immensely. And that, we say, Adam Arishon Nivra Yechidi. Adam was created as a single individual to teach you that every individual is worthy of being the whole world. And so all of us are really important, and everything we do has great impact. Anyway, so I wanted to start with that really nice mashal because I like the story.
Right.
What do you say, Jay?
Can I just say that I understand having the Kolel Yerderach, and I really appreciate it very much. But I think even though we live in a postmodern era, or maybe part of that, there's a lot of sectarianism. I mean, where even one particular branch of Hasidus is not talking to the other, or even within a particular branch of Hasidus, there's schisms. And
yes, you're right.
So it's more of almost a messianic or utopian concept.
I mean, I would call it dystopia, because, you're right that right now there's like a schism within the Gur Hasidim, that they're violent towards each other and there's so much hatred. But I put that all in the category of midos ros and sinas chinam, and something that, you're right, there's still a great deal of conflict, and it's not like everybody has melded into one. But I think a lot of that is foolishness, selfishness, katnus adam. Really just bad stuff that we need to, as intellectuals, look beyond that. So anyway, we're holding really in Perek Beis of the Nefesh HaHaim, and I'm actually in the middle of it. And so I'm in the wrong place. We're talking about that, the Tselem Elokim. And what does it mean, the Tselem Elokim? And what he's told us, the Nefesh HaHaim, Reb Chaim Volozhin, is that the Tselem means we have some similarity to God in some respect. And he hasn't said yet in what respect that is, but he's working on that. And right now we're focusing on a really important and what I consider a radical idea about the Shem Elokim being Bala Koichos Kulam. Be'inyan ma shehu yitbarach nikra Bala Kochot, ki lo kemidat basar v'dam midat HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God is different than man in this respect. A person, when he builds a building from wood, he doesn't create the wood. He maybe chops down a tree, but he doesn't create wood. He's not boireu mamsi az mikoicho ha'etz, rak shelokech etzim shekvar nibru u'misadram bebinyan. He takes raw materials and he organizes them, he cuts them, and then he nails them and he builds them. Nachar shekvar sidram lefi retzoinoi, im shekoichoi husar v'nistalek mehem, im kol zeh habinyan kayam. And the builder could die. He could go overseas. He could forget about the building. He could become crippled. But that won't affect the structure of the building. After he completes arranging it according to his will, if he ceases his efforts and departs, and like I said, dies, the structure persists. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu yitbarach shmo kemo be'et briyat ha'olamot kulam bira'am v'himtziam hu yitbarach yesh mi'ayin b'koicho bilti bal tachlis, in his infinite power. Kain me'az kol yom v'kol rega mamish. Kol koyach mitziusam v'sidram v'kiyumam talui rak b'mashu yizbarach shmo mashpia v'hem b'rtzonu yizbarach kol rega koyach v'shifat or chadash. The existence of the world and the universe at every moment is from a constant influx at the will of God to maintain the existence of the universe. With he calls it kol rega koyach v'shefat or chadash. At every moment, he's putting in an influx of energy and light. V'ilu hayahu yitbarach shmo misalek me'am koyach hashpa'ato af rega achas kerega hayu kulam le'efes v'to. If Hashem were to remove his will from it, his desire to maintain the universe for even a moment, everything would cease to exist. In that moment, everything would revert to nothingness and chaos. And again, that's a really radical idea, because science is all about the idea that you can run an experiment and then the experiment can be repeated under the same circumstances, the same conditions, and you'll be able to, repeat the experiment and you'll come up with the same results. And that's true, and that's important. And yet it's all based on essentially like the working assumption that God allows us, that he continues to maintain the universe according to the same rules that he did when he created it, and that he's constant in that. And that's really Bereshis bara Elokim. And we've said always that Elokim begematria hateva. So God created nature, which is laws that are like tavua, they're coined, they're minted into the Bria, and they're constant. But really behind the scenes, he is at every moment willing that into existence. And if he would cease to will it into existence, it would cease to exist.
Thinking of the concept of entropy and, things, if there's no constant input of energy, things are just going to basically become disorganized and fall apart. But we're saying here that Hashem prevents that from happening, essentially.
Yep, good. Law of entropy, that without putting in energy, things will become a mess, chaotic. And so, yes, you need constant influx of energy that Hashem is putting in. So I agree. That's a nice parallel to this idea.
Although God probably maintains the world using entropy. God invented entropy too.
True. It didn't have to be like that. That's he created that also. You're right about that. The law of entropy.
You think about what do you call it? The nuclear reactor in the Soviet Union. The
Chernobyl.
Yeah, and I remember seeing a program about what it looks like today, and it's like completely overgrown. Everything is just, nature has just taken over completely there.
Yeah. That's true of a lot of places in that neck of the woods.
If we don't constantly, put in the input of energy, I mean, we know, you have to do shiputim all the time, you have to maintain things, otherwise they fall apart.
Yeah, they break down.
You build a house, but if you don't maintain it, it falls apart.
So we say it in the davening, Kamoshi Yazdu Anshe Knesset Gdoila Hamechadesh Betuvo Bechol Yom Tamid Ma'aseh Bereshis Hainu Tamid Mamish Kol Eis V'Rega V'Ra'ayata Mefureshet Kamur La'oise Oyrim Gedoilim Shelo Amar Asa Ela Oseh. That we say that God is the one who actualizes, he makes the great luminaries. It doesn't say he did that, but that he does that. And now he shares a very beautiful Kabbalistic insight. Reb Chaim Volozhin, in writing the Sefer, his structure is a little bit unusual. He wrote the text and he put notes in, which he calls Hagaot. And I don't know exactly why he did that. I mean, because they're not, I guess, part of the exact flow of the text. They're sort of parenthetical, but they're part of his own work. There are other additions from his son, Rabbi Yitzchak Volozhiner, but these are from Reb Chaim Volozhin himself. And this is a really important idea. Here they call it annotation. Haga. Ba'av she'ein chidush nikar la'ayin. And that's important. That's what we said. Like science exists on the assumption of the constancy of the world, really. Of course, there are changes and, radioactivity and whatever. But, like we said, you run experiments, and if the conditions are same, you expect the same outcome. That nature is constant. That's true. But that's really from the perspective of like the lowest olam ha'asiyah, in which we run experiments.
Laws of nature don't change.
What doesn't change?
The laws of nature don't change.
The laws of nature don't change, yeah. But behind the scenes, there's movement, and things are in constant state of flux. And so listen how he says that, Omnam hadalid yisoidim iloyim, 4 supernal elements, the inun hashrashim kadmayin, ve'avan dekula, kenizkar bezohar, ve'era, shehim shoirish kol ma'aseh bereshis, upnimius kulam. So we today have a periodic table that has, 115, 120, whatever elements. But the medieval thought, and certainly, ancient thought, had this concept of the Daled Yesodos. And, of course, it's a different scientific model. Our scientific model today is very...
Sorry to interrupt just for a second, but is it recorded right now?
I think so.
Okay, just wanted a reminder to record it.
Thank you very much. So yes, it is. So the Daled Yesodos is a really big deal in Kabbalistic thought and in Jewish thought in general. The Gemara definitely also has it, and the Rambam definitely has it. And so it's important to talk a little bit about scientific models. That the fact that we have a different scientific model doesn't mean that the previous one is wrong or false. Ours is more sophisticated. It's very helpful for medicine and technology, and it's wonderful. But it's also not the last scientific model that we'll have, because science continues to advance, and there's so many things we still don't know about division of cells, and obviously things like cancer, but also in reproduction. In babies, like how do the cells know to differentiate? There's a real, the power of our scientific model is the wonderful world of inventions in modern medicine that we enjoy. And yet the modern scientific model does not recognize the existence of the soul, which is like, for me, a non-starter. Like to say that the soul doesn't exist because it can't be proven in science, to me, doesn't prove that the soul doesn't exist, but that science is missing something giant. Okay, the existence of the soul.
I don't know if science says the soul doesn't exist. They would say, we don't know if it exists or not.
Yes.
So prove it. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't.
I agree, but for me, the soul is really what keeps everything running, and sort of the differentiator between life and death. And so... And science, doesn't have that per se about the Nefesh HaHaIm, the life force within a person. And so, the idea that when you're alive, you have a Nefesh that's, going and keeping your heart pumping. And when you die, your soul departs and you're just a body without a soul. To me, that's a really solid model. That's really the emes. And science doesn't have that. That's not their description of death, the separation of body and soul.
Because you can't measure it. I mean, science.
Yes.
If you can't measure it, science can't really address it.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. David, just to share with you, Dr. Jay Pupko, who is in my kollel in the morning, is a PhD professor, let's say in toxicology, I think is your main thing. Is that right, Jay?
Well, right now I'm teaching physiology and anatomy. But
okay. So he's a scientist, and that's one of the things I love about him. But he's also interested, of course, in Jewish thought, and so we enjoy sharing Divrei Torah with one another. So anyway, we're talking about the Daled Yesodos, these 4 elements. And again, when you say elements today, you think, well, there's more than 4 elements. But the fact that in the ancient world they only dealt with 4 elements, I mean, for me that's not a problem. It's just a different scientific paradigm. And so it's yes, it's more primitive, but it's not false. It's not wrong. It's just a different way to classify and to explain things. So that's sort of important to me. So the Daled Yesodos, which again, just to state them, of fire, wind, water, and earth, correspond to what he's about to say, the 4 oisios of the Shem Havaya Baruch Hu. Okay, let's see that inside. These 4 Yesodim are the Shoirish called Ma'aseh Bereshis and the Pnimius of everything, because these are really sort of spiritual. Obviously, at a certain stage, fire is measurable, and wind is movement of air, and water is measurable, and it could be water, it could be ice, it could be snow, it could be water vapor, and of course, earth is also something very physical. But these are really Arba Yesoidin Iloyin. These are still in a spiritual level. And he says, Veheim Daled Oisiois Havaya Baruch Hu. Okay, and they correspond to the 4 letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei. And I'm going to make a chart momentarily. Of Hitmazgutam Behar Kavasam Kol Eis Verega B'Shoirish Shrasham Eino Musag Klal. So we can't measure this with science, we can't know this or feel this, but at every moment of the existence of the world, the letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei are in constant flux and cycle and affecting one another, interacting with one another. Hitmazgutam, they're melding and merging and separating, like fusion and fission. There's nuclear reactions going on at every moment between the 4 letters of Hashem's name. So every time we say that name, we say the Shem Hashem. And even though we don't say it Havaya, right? They only said it like that in the Beis HaMikdash, where they sort of dared to do so, and Hashem was revealed to that degree. We use the Shem Adnus, but at least it's Mirames to these 4 letters that are putting in energy and interacting with one another in constant motion. So even though it's Eino Musag Klal, Hu Yitbarach Shmo Mechadisham Kol Rega Lefi Ritzono, but there's something going on according to God's will, that there's a constant interaction in the Daled Yesoidim that correspond to the Daled Oisios. So I do want to.
Can I ask a question? Why do we say Havaya? The letters are not in the right order.
Yeah, well, because Havaya means being, right? Havaya, and so I think we use that. We call it the Shem Havaya because we don't want to say the Shem, and so we call it the name of God, which refers to His being. That's what I think it means. It's the name of the being. That's
so
why.
not purposely rearranging the letters.
Yeah, I think it's purposely rearranging the letters.
Yeah.
But I think it has meaning. I think Havaya could be like an experience. It's about being. So I think it's the name of God that refers to His eternal being. Shuhaya hoive v'yeh umahave esakol, and we call that Shem Havaya, as opposed to other Shemos.
Also, this is just a thought I'm thinking about. Esh, Mayim, Ruach, and Afar.
Yes.
These, when I think about it, these are really essentials of life. You can't have life without Esh, Mayim, Ruach, and Afar. If you say Esh is energy, okay, Mayim, you can't have life without water. We're looking for water in all these planets and things because you can't have life as we understand it without water. Esh, Mayim, Ruach, the oxygen in the air. You can't have life without oxygen. And Afar, you can't have, growth of any plants or anything. You can't have plant life. You can't have any kind of animal life without Afar.
Maybe Afar is carbon.
Could be, yeah.
Like Afer, like ashes.
It's not that far away. If it's, we're focusing on, the life force.
Yes.
It could, makes sense even from a scientific point of view.
Okay, I like that, Jay. I think that's also true. I want to try to explain a little bit the correspondence between these Dalid Oisiois of the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei and the Arba Yesodos, because this is the correspondence, like Alpi Kabala, you could find this maybe in the Sefer Yetzirah or something like that. And the Yud, remember the Yud is the smallest of all the letters, and it can even be represented by a single point of ink, like in a Sefer Torah, for example, when you have the hay, and you need a leg of the hay. If the leg of the hay, which is supposed to be a Yud, if it's a single dot, it's still kosher. So the Yud can be represented by a single dot. And I think that's really significant, that it's like a dot, it's like an electron or a neutron, it's a particle. And it's a particle of energy. Let it be a photon, how about that? It's a particle of light. And so that energy, although, in English we use the word energy and light, in Hebrew we use the word esh, but that it's referring to that energy. And so that's the tiny Yud, which is like the spark of energy that moves through everything. And also because Yud is a single dot, everything is comprised of Yuds. These, like, I might call them microscopic Yuds, or, every letter is made of dots, like, on a computer screen, how many pixels? Like every pixel is really a Yud. And so it's energy, it's light. The two Heys of the Shem Havaya are very interesting. The Hey is like a feminine letter. It's receiving energy from the Yud or from the Vav. And yet it's an opposite. Here, the first Hey corresponds to water. And water is representative of life, right? The human body is mostly water. And it corresponds also to like desire, taiva, the flow of water, and like we sweat and we salivate. Liquids move through our body when there's will. Like if you run, you sweat because you're running for your ratzon. When you're hungry and you want to eat, you start to salivate and so forth. When you're really sad, so tears come out of your eyes. So the liquids of our body express our will and so forth. So the first Hey of the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei corresponds to water, which is, again, life starts with water. The seed from the man is carried really in a liquid, and it's delivered in liquids. So the conduit of life is in water. The Vav is, whenever I talk about Vav, I always mention that the Hebrew word Vav means hook, and it's a connection. It's the Hebrew word, the English word is a conjunction. We call it Vav HaChibur, the Vav which means and Vav sometimes means O, but it's about putting things together, whether it's and or. And the Ruach is also about movement. It's, the wind is blowing and taking things from place to place. And so it connects everything, really. So the Vav is a connector, and that corresponds to the Ruach, which also connects things and moves them from place to place. The most inert of the Dalit.
Would Ruach include things like neshama, like soul, spirit?
Good question. Ruach is one part of our soul, right? We have something called, neshama, ruach, nefesh. Okay, 3 parts of the soul, and there's really 5 parts. There's a chaya and yechida above the neshama. So the ruach, I'll say it like this, David, that in the soul of a human being, the neshama is very high. It's like a chelik melokam imal. The nefesh includes the lower stuff, like hadam hu nefesh, like your blood that boils, or desires, you want to eat meat and stuff like that. That's in your nefesh. And the ruach, which is like your respiratory system, your breathing and so forth, that is what joins and connects, it's the Vav that connects your neshama to your nefesh is the ruach, okay? So the ruach connects to both the neshama and the nefesh. And that's like the Vav that connects the Yud K to the Vav K, to the last Hey of the Shem Havaya. So Vav always plays a bridging role, a connecting role. That's the role of Vav, like the Ruach, which is about movement and connection. The last one is Earth itself, Afar, like what you said, about carbon and so forth. If we look at the Shem Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, we notice, of course, that there's the same letter twice. Okay, the letter Hey is there twice. And so in a way, there's really only three letters. There's only really Yud, Hey, and Vav. But the second Hey is like the recipient of all three previous letters. And so the Afar, it's like Mother Earth. All the action happens, whether they talk about fire as the power to ascend, water is descending, and Ruach is lateral. The movement of wind and of air is lateral. And the Afar also tends to fall. It's of course a function of gravity, that it goes to the bottom. So the Afar is affected by the first three, by the other three. The Eish, Mayim, and Ruach act upon the Afar. And so the last Hey of the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei is also a recipient of the energy, the movement, the will of the first three letters. It corresponds to the Shechina. And so it's a part that is mushpa, that is influenced by stuff outside of it. And so just like Mother Earth is affected by what we build on her, what we plant in her, okay? She's sort of passive. There's even, the Gemara uses that expression about sexuality, about Esther, that she was essentially raped by Achashverosh. She's called Karka Oilam. She plays the role of Mother Earth. She's passive, and stuff happens to her. That's like Afar. That is like the last Hey of the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, that it's the recipient and the passive partner in the action that's happening from the energy of the other three oisios. So that was this Haggah in the Nefesh HaHaim. I'm going to go back now. Jay?
I can understand this, but I keep thinking about Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is the was it effable, ineffable?
Yeah, ineffable.
Ineffable name of Hashem, and it's like so high, and we're talking about more earthly things here.
Yafeh. You're making an important point. And so let me show you how the Nefesh HaHaim really says it to avoid any misunderstanding. We're not saying that this is what Yud Kei Vav Kei means. We're not saying that, okay? He says that these four Yesoidim Eloyin, the four supernal elements, who are the ancient roots, the precursors of all, as written in the Zohar, are the roots of all events associated with creation and aspect. Well, I don't like the English. He says they are Shem Shoirish Kol Ma'aseh Bereshis, Heim Daled Oisios Havaya Baruch Hu. Okay, he really means that they stem from the four Oisios of Hashem, because this is not the Perush of the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, because what you're absolutely right, Jay, that the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei is much higher than this. This is like the lowest iteration, or a lower iteration of the meaning of the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, that it translates into these four Yesoidos, but not that this is really what it is. Good evening, Michael. Nice to see you. Welcome. So we're going on in the Nefesh HaHaim. Ve'inyan hitmazgutam. Okay, we briefly mentioned this last time. The combinations of the letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei that's going on constantly behind the scenes of the universe. That again, we're not able to see it or measure it through science, but we know about it from the Zohar HaKadosh, and this is sort of the role of Kabbalah, where philosophy and science couldn't know this. It's only something that was given over. It's part of the Torah that was given to Moshe Rabbeinu on Mount Sinai, and we have it through oral tradition. And what it says is that in this constant energy flow within the letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Inyan Hitmazgutam Kol Rega corresponds to the 1,080 Sirufei Hashem Baruch Hu, Al Pi Hishtanut Nikudoteham, 1,080 Rig'ei Hasha'ah. So again, this is fascinating because it's now a combination of Nigla and Nister. We all know that in Shul, where they announce when is the Moilad, they tell us which day, which hour, and how many Chalakim. And you may or may not know that the number of Chalakim in an hour is 1,080, okay? And why did they pick the number 1,080 to divide the hour into that many parts? Why not 3,600, like seconds, or any other number? So the Rambam answers it that it's quite arbitrary. Why did they choose this number? Because it's a beautiful number that's easily divided by many other integers. And so out of convenience, they chose this number. That's the Rambam's answer. But the answer al pi Kabala is what the Nefesh HaHaim says here, that in every hour, there are 1,080 different combinations of the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei according to 6 different vowels, with a komatz and with a patach and a tseirei and a segol and a kubutz, etc. So each of the letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei, there's 4 letters, and they each get 6 vowels, and they're paired up with an Aleph. And so ultimately you have 26 times 36, okay? Which is 936, and then you have another 144 for 144 Alephs, and together that equals 1,080. So behind the scenes of every hour, there's this constant flow of divine energy through the letters and the vowels of the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, which means that every moment has a different character than the moment that preceded it and that succeeds it. V'chein mishtanim od kol sha'a letzirufeha acherim. V'gam ein midat yom shaveh lemidat laila. And the day and the night are not the same. Lo kol yom doime lechaveiro. Nor is one day like another. Shelefana v'shela'achrav klal. V'zeh she'omrar hamechadesh betuvo maise bereshis dafka. So now we have this fascinating and powerful insight that when we say that God every day is creating the world and He's mechadesh betuvo b'chol yom maise bereshis, we know a little bit about the mechanics of it. That what He's doing is that through every hour of every day, and every day is different, and day is different than night, but He's running through like a cycle, a cyclical process of influxing energy into the universe according to His will through the letters of the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, in addition to the letter Aleph. And every hour, there's 1,080 different combinations. So again, it's not science, it's Kabbalah. But it's fascinating in that it's systematic and that it is revealed to us. And there's some stuff that we can relate to, because one of the things we're going to see in Sha'ar base of the Nefesh HaHaim is like this is part of the role of prayer. When we say the words of our davening, we are giving life and energy, and we're like a mirror or like a satellite dish where Hashem is running through the oisi Yud Kei Vav Kei and the Alephs and the Nekudos at every moment. And we're saying the davening Ashrei Yoshev Eisach Hoid Yalucha Selah, and we're also going through the Aleph base and using the letters and the Nekudos. So there's this like concert, there's this question and answer, there's this duet going on of Hashem putting this energy through the letters and the dots, and we're putting it back through our soul, and it's coming out of our mouth, and we're releasing it back on high into the heavens. And so we become participants in Ma'aseh Bereshis and the constant flux of energy throughout the universe. So that makes our davening really important, because we're like a satellite dish. We're getting stuff and we're giving stuff. We're sending out a signal. Anachnu mishadrim, anachnu, we have a tether. We're AM, we're FM, we're shortwave, we're doing all that stuff. And it's coming out of the letters of our prayers and the nekudos. So davening becomes something that we never thought about. It's not just like asking for stuff or thanking for stuff. It's participating in the supernal energy which Hashem is putting into the system, and we are like recycling it and leveraging it and restoring it and reflecting it. And so that's keeping the world running. And he gave us that role. God gave us that role to participate, to be his partners in Ma'aseh Bereshis. And that's an honor that we have the capacity to do so. And it's one of the reasons why it's so important to pray B'Lashon HaKodesh. It's of course permissible to pray in another language if you don't understand or you can't read Hebrew, but praying in Lashon Kodesh is much more powerful than praying in a foreign language because of this issue of the energy contained in the letters and the vowels.
So does this presuppose that Hashem is receiving the message from us?
We say Hashem is Shomei Tfilah, right? That he listens, he's receiving messages.
Yeah, so we're broadcasting our, these messages. Hashem is getting these messages, and there's some kind of cycle that's going on.
Yes, he's using them, like he's Roifei Amo Yisrael, like he's using them for refuah, to heal sick people. And he's using them to be Moirida Geshem or Moirida Tal and stuff like that. So yes, that's part of the way he created the world, that there's all these angels and all these koichos, and they're affected by the input that the Jewish people do through our prayers and our Ma'aseh Mitzvahs. But right now we're talking about prayer and the words we say. So the words we say have energy and power in them, and they have impact on the smooth flowing of the world.
And that would also require that the letters be in a certain sequence. If you just said the alphabet, it wouldn't do the same thing.
It wouldn't do the same thing, but it does stuff. And one of the, I've told you before, Jay, that I have, the Sefer Yetzirah with a beautiful English translation from Aryeh Kaplan. And he puts in there like meditative techniques. And a lot of the meditative techniques are actually saying letters of the Aleph base with various vowel combinations that actually have no meaning. So it'll be stuff like a, u, e, ba, be, bu, bi, stuff like that, where you're saying letters and vowels and you're putting, you're meditating on that and giving, participating in energy flows, even though there's no pshat, there's no simple meaning to what you're saying. So there is, both things work. And that's that famous Hasidic story, right? The Baal Shem Tov said there was a boy who came to the synagogue and he couldn't read the siddur. And so whether he played his flute or he just, said the Aleph base or he sang a tune, but that's that idea that by, just verbalizing whatever you're verbalizing or however you're letting through your mouth and your soul and your respiratory system, you're returning power to the Ma'aseh Bereshis, and you're participating in the cycle of life that God has created and continues to maintain at every moment.
So as far as the tefillot are concerned, we have to Tehillim, which was, written by Navim or people with Ruach HaKodesh. What about the other tefillot? I mean, the Shemona Esrei was written by the Anshe Knesset Agdola. Did they have that power to be able to combine the
Absolutely.
words? They had that level of spirituality that they were able to put together.
Yes, the Nefesh HaHaim is going to talk about davening specifically in the Sha'ar base. But one of the things we say, Jay, about the Anshe Knesset Agdola, Ubeineihem Kama Neviim, And so that capacity for prophecy and to see into this inner world of divine energy and how to relate to it and the order of the brachas and the wording of the brachas is very important. And that's why people have different nusach Ashkenaz, nusach Sfarad, Edus HaMizrach, and nusach Arizal. These things are serious because the nekudos, the dots really matter because you're doing different things with your prayer when you utter the words in different ways. So that's why davening, even though you don't always have kavanah of your thinking about every word you say, but every word you say has impact just by saying it. So to me, that's important. I want to stop here and thank everybody for being here and looking forward to carrying on next week, Bez Hashem, Monday night at 9, okay?
Yashakah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Nice seeing you, Michal, even for a few minutes.
Thank you. Yeah. Glad I caught the end.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem. Good night.
Okay.